That negatively, I'm sorry. I'm going to start with something and work into something else, all right? So you just all pay attention and follow along. True love will find you in the end. You find out just who's your friend. Don't be sad, I know you will. Don't give up until true love will find you in the end. This is a promise with a catch. It's only if you're looking to find you. This true love searching too. How they recognize you unless you step out into the light, the light. Don't be sad, I know you will. Don't give up until true love will find you in the end. Don't be sad, I know you will. Don't give up until true love will find you in the end. I remember the lights, I think, more than anything. In my profession, you always remember the lights. They're on me right now. That afternoon, that evening, I remember the lights the most. I regained consciousness, and I remember the sterility of those lights that are always in ICU rooms or in emergency rooms. And I remember looking down a hallway, and my mother was down this hallway, and she was talking to a doctor. That much was apparent to me in my condition. And what happened after that was kind of a confused series of moments for me. I remember speaking to the head of psychiatrics and going through the process of willfully committing myself. And I found myself later that evening in yellow pajamas in a bed in a psych ward. And that song by Daniel Johnston went through my head again and again and again. Now, for those of you who don't know who Daniel Johnston is, he's from West Virginia. He lives in Texas now, and he's probably one of the greatest or most underrated songwriters in American history, or little appreciated songwriters in American history. He's schizophrenic and suffers from depression, and his life reads like a Tim Robbins novel, but not in a good way. He's gone through, the record that song is from actually is called 1990, and it actually isn't a collection of songs completely recorded in a studio. Half of it is live recordings and demos because he was institutionalized at the time. Flying back from Austin after coming off his meds, his father is an ex-Air Force pilot, and as they were flying across the country, he got it into his head that he was Casper the Friendly Ghost, and he took the keys out of the ignition and threw them out the window. His father crash landed the plane in a forest, and they both survived, and he was institutionalized after that. So that song kept going through my head that night. I was in a room with several other people. It wasn't a private room or anything. I was in a room with several other people, and it kept going through my head, it kept going through my head. And the one thing that kept going through my head about that song is that given that man's experience, given his whole life, because these things don't start really, I mean, when you're talking about something like what I suffer from, which is bipolarity, it starts from the day you're born, right? You don't realize it, of course, until much later on, until there, a perfect storm of conditions sometimes leads you to the realization or to the diagnosis or to some kind of action that is undertaken that results of you waking up in that hospital. But I thought about the lyrics to that song, and I found it unbelievable that a man that has gone through as much torment as Daniel Johnston has in his life, and there's a lot of it, could write something that beautiful. And it's something that's always stuck with me. You know, my grandmother said to me when I was very young, there's a lot of beauty in the world. And it is surrounded by an incredible amount of ugliness. And what artists do is they make that ugliness beautiful so that you can see beauty. And it's something that's stuck with me my whole life. Well, actually, a lot of things she said to me stuck with me my whole life. And she passed away when I was 14 years old. So you can imagine the impact the woman had on me. But I spent 2 weeks, or actually a little bit less than that, in a psych ward. And I wrote almost an entire record in my head that I would 2 months later go on to record. It's called Hospital Music, on which I would cover that song for that very reason. It's an interesting thing. When I was first asked to do this, I talked to the people at TED about it, and you know, explaining creativity and mental illness and getting into kind of the dichotomy of it all. It's an interesting thing because I'm not one of those people that really likes to talk about the connection between the two, because you can be a creative person and not be mentally ill, and you can be mentally ill and not a creative person, right? I mean, there's a direct correlation, I think, in some instances between the two. If you were asking me right now, in my opinion, do I think John Lennon was bipolar? I would say absolutely, looking at his life, right? It's an interesting thing that when you look at a lot of people that have come out and talk openly in the arts, and you know, a lot of artists have come out and talk about it, you know. It's interesting when you look back at their careers, how you can kind of see, you know, almost why they did what they did and how they did it, and you know, the trouble they got in and the rest of it. And misperceptions. I think misperceptions are interesting about it too. Like, for example, here's a picture of me. Is the E supposed to be something to do with expert or technology? There's no pictures? You guys screwed me on my pictures? That's styrofoam. I'm not pulling any punches. Screw that. That's styrofoam. Y'all paid to come in here. That sign, it's not wood, it's styrofoam. Harmful to the environment. They could have made that out of wood. No, it's styrofoam. Anyway, the point is, have you ever seen a picture of me in 1999? I look like a heroin addict. Yeah? Some of you might have. And I do. I'm 6 feet tall. I've been 6 feet tall since I was in the 9th grade. And at the time, I weighed about 138 pounds. I stayed that way until my 30s. It wasn't until I was diagnosed, and obviously went on a regime of medication, that I actually started to gain weight. And it's funny because now I'm ridiculed by certain people for being fat. Because that's just a reality of being, I hate using this term, but a celebrity, I guess you could call it, or whatever. But that's a reality. But it's something that I found interesting when I looked back at myself, because, you know, I realized I didn't start playing guitar until I was 20 years old. And prior to that, most of my time was spent involved in fine art. And I would stay up for 4 days and paint, and literally not go to sleep. And then I would go to sleep for 3 days. And wouldn't work a job in all that too somehow. But and then the whole thing would recycle. And I remember that during that time in my life, I would pace around at night, because if I couldn't sleep, I would grind my fingers so hard into my palms of my hands that my palms would bleed. And none of it made sense to me, but I didn't question it. And that's odd, isn't it? That you wouldn't question that kind of a behavioral pattern whatsoever. You're just kind of like, well, I can't sleep. So I'm pacing endlessly in a circle, putting my fingers through my skin. And, I wasn't cutting myself. It wasn't anything deliberate. It was just something that I did. And I think that that speaks to kind of the awareness individually in people when you think about it. It's that recognizing something within yourself is a very difficult struggle to do. I mean, never mind the walls we face after we recognize these things about ourselves, right? But the greatest thing and the most important thing is the admission to yourself that there is no reduction in the self because of these things. I'm attacked quite often if I write any kind of piece, like say I've been attacked writing political commentary when I wrote for The Guardian, attacked because I'm a mentally ill person. Not on the merits that I know what I'm talking about, or that I'm a musician, which of course everyone will use against you at the drop of a hat anyway. What do you know, you're a musician, right? Which I always find hilarious, but but mental illness is something that's used against you as a weapon, immediately. And I've always found it funny, the contradiction. I find it funny in our society how at least over the last 10 years, I've watched a lot of major initiatives occur with regards to mental health. People becoming more aware, dealing with stigmatisms, or the stigma, pardon me, of it all. But yet, the disconnection that we also have outside of that, not necessarily to do with mental illness, but the disconnection that we have with what we know as the creative mind. Now, if you look at what we understand about creativity, it's a limitless thing. You can't pinpoint. No one can pinpoint what creativity is, right? But what is our understanding of it is very skewed, right? Most people will look at, say, touching oneself with a foam finger in the MTV Music Awards, and there will be some correlation between, right, that. And yet that kind of action can have a massive impact on public perception and public commentary. Now, I've always wondered this. What would someone do in this day and age if they found out that Francis Bacon went into an entire floor of flats, used a ball-peen hammer while he was painting a series of paintings to bust down all the walls, defecated and urinated throughout the entire place, left chicken carcasses, half-eaten chicken carcasses all over the place, drank himself silly, and did God knows what else, but walked out of there with pure genius? What would our perception of that be? That it was wrong because he did that and that was his process. So there's that interesting schism, isn't there, between those two things? Because we view one as absolutely okay because it has that kind of artistic, joie de vivre about it. But yet touching oneself with a foam finger when someone else has written your music is completely a horrible thing. And many Christian girls are crying at home because of it. And then you come back to ultimately the reality that you have to, when one deals with personal demons and those demons, cast the negative and the positive, and you have to mix them together and somehow they form who you are and you can't ever explain it. And they lead to results that ultimately affect other people. All of the rest of it becomes very much a sideshow. And I guess really, besides the fact that I've probably made absolutely no sense whatsoever to you people over the last 15 minutes, that's the one thing that it ultimately comes down to. It's that in our society, it is a sideshow. Like my grandmother said, there is beauty in the world and it is surrounded by ugliness. But through that ugliness, we find that beauty. And that's something that whether you have something within yourself that you have to deal with, such as a mental illness or anything else in your life that's difficult, whether it's economic or any, if it has any other kind of social implication. These are things that we overcome because to focus on those things which make us realize why this life is worth living is the ultimate goal. art will always be a part of that because it connects us greater than any other power on the planet. Music connects us greater than almost any other power on the planet besides the planet itself. And that's something I think that's really important, you know, considering that if you kind of look at mankind, and we could obviously talk about this subject for the next 25 years, but being that we are probably the only truly parasitic species on the planet, that we of course now exist beyond the circle of life and will be our own undoing eventually. I don't mean to get everyone down, but it's coming. But you know, wrapping it all up within the creative process, these are things we think of. You know, these are things that you think about, and these are things that come to you unconsciously. Everything, the wind blowing, weather, how you equate anything, is what affects you. So there's an artist in us all in that way, just as there's a professor in us all in that way, you know, or a priest, if you believe in God. Or a God if you don't. So, I'll shut up and sing now. According to the big clock, I have 1 minute and 30 seconds left. I don't care. Good morning, don't cop out. You crawl from the cancer to land on your feet. You're crazy here to want this, and even for a while, we're making this shit up. The reasons being easy to pay you count. Remember the others, they just kind of went away. So you're driving, it's rush hour. The cars on the freeway are moving like slugs when you drift off to wake up. You always hit the brakes. And we're done lying for a living. The strange days are coming. Oh, you're gone, gone, dead, oh, dying. Dead or trying to go. It's evening, you're tired. You sleepwalk a robot out to the street. You crazy here to want this, even for a while. You're driving, it's rush hour. The cars on the freeway are moving backwards into a wall of fire. Backwards into a wall of fire. We died lying for a living. Strange days are coming, you're gone. morning don't come back. Thank you very much. Y'all take care.